This is our garden. And in the next couple of days, we're going to turn this dust bowl into a beautiful, productive food growing area. Welcome, my name is Moreno from rootsreconnected.com, and behind me is a piece of land that is in serious need of some love. When we bought this property some 8 months ago, we decided to first install the main water harvesting features and set up a system to get water from the well. Since we didn't know exactly how our well would perform in the dry hot summers here in central Portugal, we wanted to see if we would still have water in it at the end of summer. And we couldn't have had a better summer to see the performance of our well. We've had an extremely long, hot and dry summer with some serious droughts. Temperatures reached all the way up to 47 degrees Celsius, and we had several weeks above the 40-degree mark. Despite this, we watered our swales and food forest nearly every day with roughly 2 to 3 cubic meters each time. To our surprise, we are now at the end of September and the well is still going strong. This gives us enough confidence that we have sufficient water for our vegetable gardens. So it's time to start building them. But how do you go about starting a brand new garden? Before we get all excited and start building our beds, we need to come up with a plan that makes sure that we can include everything that we want to have in the garden, and we have considered all the different elements and features our land is dealing with. Not only that, but we also want to make sure that our gardens are beautiful, efficient, and optimized for growing food. So, first thing we need to do is to create a simple garden design. To do this, I'm going to walk you through a 5-step process that we personally use, and together we will create a garden design for the space that we have available here. Now, complete transparency, I'm not a professional garden designer, and the steps I cover in this video is how I do it, and hopefully that will resonate with you and help you come up with some plans and ideas to design your own garden. Step 1, get to know your land. Whether you recently bought a new house with a garden area or you've been living there for a while, before we start to do anything in depth, the first thing we need to do is take a stroll through the garden, free of any bias, with a mind geared towards observation. At this stage, we just want to get a feel for the garden area and take in what's coming. The goal of this observational walk is to discover natural processes on site. Every piece of land has a story to tell, and it is our job as gardeners, homesteaders, and stewards of the land to try and figure out what it's trying to tell us. Because the better we understand the story, the better we can create a design for our gardens. And the way we do that is by reading the landscape. We need to observe and note down the things that we come across. And there are a couple of things that we personally look out for when we're doing this observational walk. One of the things we look for is how the land has been used in the past. Can we see any large old stumps of trees, maybe an old fence or barbed wire, foundations of some sort, and anything that might tell us what has been here. Things like this can help tell us what has happened in the garden area in the past. Other things we look for are the elevation differences and the lay of the land. This can show and tell us the way water tends to behave in the garden. We might have some depressions which could indicate places that could potentially cause problems that we need to consider in our design. Same for erosion. If we can see any gullies or bare soil from large rain events, we need to take this into consideration so that we can come up with solutions to potential problems. We also pay close attention to animal tracks and signs, which can tell us about the wildlife activity on the site. If there are any trees in the garden or closely around it, look at the top of the trees and take note of the wind direction during different times of the year. This might help you understand prevailing wind directions, which is valuable information to take with you into your design process. Another observation to make is the existing vegetation that's growing in the garden. What trees are growing there? Are there any shrubs or specific ground covers? These plant species might indicate what is going on in the garden. They could indicate wet areas, dry areas, shade or sun exposure, and we write those things down. At last, are there any microclimates in the garden, and if so, where? Are there any sections that are very shady or the opposite, very exposed, windy or protected from the wind? Understanding what you're dealing with in the garden is critical information to gather so you can base your design decisions on the observations you make. Step 2. Create a garden feature list. Before we can start with the creation of our design, we first need to know how we're going to use the gardens. Of course, we want to grow our own food, so garden beds are essential. But is that the only way we'll use the garden? In our case, we also want to relax and enjoy in it. That's why we built a fire pit here where we can simply lay back and rest. And on some days I even grab my laptop and get some work done here. Pretty nice office, isn't it? So ask yourself, how are you going to use your garden? Do you have kids that can play in it? Maybe you need to dedicate some space for a playing area. Do you have pets that need garden space or you'd like to block out of the area? Perhaps you'll need to install some fencing. Do you want to have an area for enjoyment and relaxation? A seating area or covered patio will be a great feature for this. Taking these things into consideration during these initial stages will allow you to come up with ideas to include or exclude in your overall garden design. A great tip to help you during this stage of the design process is trying to see your garden area as outdoor rooms. Just like a house, you can have a dining area, kitchen, living area, private spaces, bathroom, storage area, and use these spaces to come up with sections for your garden and how you're going to use it. This is also a great way to not be overwhelmed by the design implementation, as you can simply work on creating one area at a time. As you're going through the process of figuring out how you're going to use the garden, make a list of all the things that you would like to have included. We're going to use this list in the final step of the garden design creation, where we will position each element onto our design and decide its final placement. So if you want to grow your own food, you'll need garden beds. So we write down garden beds. To help with growing food, we also need to use some tools. So a tool shed or storage area will be necessary. This we'll write down as well. As you go through the process of thinking about what you want to include, write them down on a list to give you a good overview of the things that you would like to include in your garden. Think of everything you will need to grow food, going from seed to storage. Maybe you want to have a small nursery so you can start your own seedlings. Perhaps a post-harvest area where you can easily clean and process your vegetables will also come in handy. Make sure to include it on your list. Maybe you can even consider creating a small outdoor kitchen area where you can directly cook or prepare your freshly harvested food and make some nice meals out of them. And like this, we think of things that we want to include and compile a list out of them, so we can use this idea list for the final step when we create our garden design. Step 3. Create a simple base map. When we've observed the land and created an idea list of features we want or need to include in our overall garden design, it's time to create a base map of our garden. A base map is essentially a scale drawing showing you the existing features and boundaries of your garden. It is the starting point before the creation. The way we like to do this is to simply draw our garden area on a piece of paper, including everything that is already currently present in the garden, so things like trees, fences, buildings, seating area, or whatever is already there. What I personally like to do for this step, which is pretty helpful in the process, is to use Google Earth or Google Maps and find your garden so that you have a good overview of your land from a bird's eye view. I also want to go outside and make sure to measure the garden from corner to corner so that I know exactly the dimensions of it. This will allow me to draw our garden exactly to scale with the measurements of the garden. Once we have that in place, it's simply a matter of drawing all the existing elements onto this base map. Trees, buildings, pathways, fences, and everything that's already on the land. After completing this, we now have a base map of our garden ready, and this gives us a great overview of what we're working with and how much space we have available. Then I make a copy of the base map and use one of the copies to overlay the sector analysis of the land. Step 4. Create a sector analysis. The sector analysis map is basically a map overlaid onto your base map that shows the different energies that either move through your site or are already present. They're often uncontrollable and natural elements, so think of wind, water and sunlight, but also things like pollution, wildlife, invasive plants, high fire risk zones, neighbors and noises. All these things are considered sectors, and the idea behind doing a sector analysis and taking the different sectors into consideration when doing the design is that you can anticipate and make design decisions that will mitigate, mediate and improve how those uncontrollable influences affect your specific site. Any sector your land is dealing with has some way or shape of influencing the whole system, and some specific sectors will have more effect and influence than others. When creating a sector analysis, you can go to an extent of extreme detail where every little corner of your property and every little detail is noted down and thought of. I personally think that it's a bit overkill for a garden design, so I mainly focus on the extremes. These are the factors that will have the most impact on our garden. Let's do one together. Take sunlight for example. Sunlight is an important factor in growing food, and the further away you get from the equator, the more important this aspect is. We need to identify the path of the sun in summer when it's really high in the sky and days are long, as well in winter when it's much lower in the sky and days are shorter. Whilst it rises from the east and sets in the west, what happens to your garden? Are there any obstructions that cause a part of your garden to be shaded? Are there any obstructions where you don't want them? Or is it beneficial to have certain things that provide some needed shade for your garden? Knowing how different sun angles can have an influence on your garden will allow you to come up with design considerations to either open up space and allow for more sunlight or include features to create more shade. If you identified some shady spots in your garden, this might be a great place to plant shade-tolerant shrubs and vegetables, whereas in sunny parts of the garden you might want to grow heat-loving plants. And like this, you continue to cover each sector individually. Fire zones, wind direction, wildlife patterns, flow and direction of water, views and privacy, pollution, frost buckets, these are all sectors to consider. And at this stage, after the creation of your base map and sector analysis, it is time to take the list of features we want to have in the garden and start putting the design together. Step 5. Place design elements onto your map. When gardening, you will inevitably walk a lot back and forth from locations. When you need to grab a tool, sow seeds in the nursery, harvesting plants and bringing them inside to process, consume or store them. As you can imagine, if elements are not planned in relation to each other, you will create a very inefficient and less enjoyable gardening experience. To avoid this and help with the design process, we use something that is called a relative placement design. At this stage of the design process, it is important to think of the relevance each of the elements have with each other. Essentially, we want to come up with a design that minimizes foot traffic, increases efficiency and practicality. How often do we use a tool shed when you garden? Pretty much every time. Knowing this, we want to make sure to locate it as close to our garden beds as possible. And talking about garden beds, you want to put them as close to your home as possible so it won't easily get neglected and it's easy to harvest something quickly to prepare a meal at home. And like this, you take the list of features you want to have in your garden and start overlaying them onto your base map. Whilst doing this little exercise, always take into consideration the different sectors you're dealing with and come up with ideas and solutions to include or exclude them depending on your goals. If you want extra shade, consider growing trees on those locations. If you want to exclude wildlife, make sure to put up fencing. If you want to block the wind from a direction, either build or plant a windbreak there. Work your way down your list and try to find the best possible solutions to your situation. Whilst doing this task, have fun playing around with the different features that you want to have in the garden and be creative with the options you have available. Think of ways to position each element and what effects it will have on that specific placement. Are you increasing shade, decreasing wind, opening a view or blocking it if you plant a tree there? As you can imagine, doing this beforehand will give you a lot of clarity and confidence moving forward with the creation of your own beautiful garden. And I cover more about this in a brand new free guide, Year-Round Vegetables at Home, in which I go over 6 important steps to help you start a garden from scratch, all the way down to having year-round food abundance, no matter your climate. This free download is now available over at our blog on rootsreconnected.com. Simply type in your email and I'll immediately send you over a copy. I'll put the link down below in the description box. I can't wait to start implementing the design that we've created for our personal garden, which we're going to cover in the upcoming videos. I hope you've enjoyed it, learned something new, and I wish you a good rest of your day. See you in the next video.